Good evening, everyone. I know that we're currently waiting for other people to sign on. We were supposed to have 22 people, but they will be joining us shortly. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Osak, and I serve as a social media director and a meeting coordinator for the HLAA Boston chapter. Additionally, I'm a public speaker and an advocate for communication and accessibility. This is a very exciting, we have a very exciting guest tonight. So I'm going to move on to Carrie Silverman, who is the president of the HLAA Boston chapter, who's going to be introducing to David Baldridge. Carrie, if you can unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So I'd like everyone to join me in welcoming David Baldridge to our meeting this evening. David is a professor of management at Oregon State University and also the Toomey and Newcomb Faculty Fellow. His teaching at OSU focuses on leadership and negotiation. He also does research with his research interest, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing individuals and others with disabilities. David holds a PhD in management from UConn, an MBA in finance, and a BGS in economics, English, and philosophy from the University of Michigan. David's work is published in several leading management journals, and he serves on editorial boards for Human Relations, International Journal of Human Resource Management, and Managerial Psychology. David also, in his spare time, is a member of the HLAA Parent Organization Board of Directors. David is also much like us. He is a CI user and has wrestled with hearing loss since childhood. So with that introduction, I'd like to welcome David.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Baldridge. I will do a little bit of a self-introduction also. Let me start by sharing some PowerPoint slides. So I will get the right screen here. Okay, I trust you're seeing my introductory slide. Super, thank you. So I'll add a couple more things to my introduction, which I appreciate. First for our agenda, I want to talk about three main topics, and I want to keep this really informal, so have as much conversation as we can. That's the upside of a smaller group. So I'll bring up three different topics, and we can talk about them as much as folks want to. I'll show a few slides to kind of get you thinking about some different topics, and then we'll pause for questions after each of those segments. But the first one is a topic that I often aim more towards employers to help them understand the diversity among people with hearing loss. So one aspect would be sometimes employers think of hearing loss as being like a master status, whereas things like our race, our gender, our age, all those things matter a lot also. But then even within hearing loss itself, how severe your hearing loss is at different frequencies, at what age you were first impacted, all these things really impact how we interact with the world around us or how we cope. So I wanted to cover that topic a little bit tonight because it's something you need to be prepared to talk with other people about. And it's the kind of thing you can't explain once, you've got to explain and remind and re-explain. And then the second is, and that's kind of an ongoing area of research for me, I'm actively working on helping people understand diversity among people who have hearing loss. Then I've done a lot of research on workplace accommodation, primarily why people don't always ask for the accommodation that they need, and really looking more at the workplace environment where people don't feel safe asking for accommodation. So look at the request process as well as common accommodations. And then a topic that's dear to all of us would be career success, right? So when we lose our hearing, we don't lose our obligations to our family. We don't lose our ambitions, our desire for interesting and meaningful work. So I've just done I've done a couple of studies on looking at career success in different ways. So those would be our three main topics for tonight. And we'll pause after each for questions and answers. So this is kind of a resume view of my life. So Carrie presented some of this already, but a couple of things I'll dwell upon a little bit more is that I did live in the Boston area for about 7 years. So I lived in Gloucester and Rockport. It was an amazing time in my life. And that's when I really kind of crossed from being severely hard of hearing to being profoundly deaf. And my career solution was to go back to school at the University of Connecticut, get my PhD, and become a professor. So it all worked out wonderfully for me. Had I known going in how hard it would be, I probably would have chickened out. So it's good I didn't have all the information up front. And my hearing loss was first diagnosed in second or third grade, like standard school tests, and no one was aware that I had hearing loss at that time. So I'm guessing that the onset was probably closer to age 2 or 3. I don't really know. And it just changed slowly year after year. I lost my high frequencies first, and eventually everything just stripped away so that by the time I was in my late 20s, I couldn't understand speech without speech reading. I couldn't use a phone. So I was functionally deaf at that point, even though I could hear dump trucks with large rocks in them and things like that, or jet engines, right? Um, so after getting my PhD at the University of Connecticut, my first job was with Rochester Institute of Technology, which a lot of people may know because NTID is on their campus. So I was completely deaf at that point. I worked in the College of Business. I taught regular business classes. But having NTID on campus meant that there were more really interesting and educated deaf and hard of hearing people in one small place than you would find most any place else. Although Boston is a close second. Boston is stuffed with a lot of really smart people with hearing loss. So during my time at RIT, I got my first cochlear implant, and that kind of opened my world back up. Um, Behind the scenes, I am a ski bum and surf bum. I love outdoor adventure. So I loved Rochester, but I always dreamed of living in the Northwest. And so the cochlear implants kind of opened my world back up. And in fact, in my offer letter at Oregon State, it ended with, "We ski 12 months a year in Oregon," which isn't true. It's only 9 months a year, but nonetheless, here I am. So in summary, I just want to share that as an individual, I like to joke that I've experienced hearing loss at basically every age, from preschool, grade school, to now late career with gray hair. I also like to brag that I've experienced every level of hearing loss, from mild to profound, and then with cochlear implants back to kind of mild, moderate, unless I run out of battery, and then I'm back to profoundly deaf. And of course, we all know in some situations, our hearing aids, our cochlear implants don't work really well. So a lot of background noise, and I'm kind of back to square one. So that's my background in brief. And through my research, though, I've had the luxury of interviewing a lot of other people that have hearing loss. surveying, and then systematically analyzing government data. So beyond my own experience, I've gotten to know a lot of other people's experiences with hearing loss, both in terms of people who have been very successful, and most people, quite honestly, struggle. It's really difficult. Employment is tough when you have hearing loss. So I want to say that up front. Also, I'm thinking about it. I am currently collecting data with a colleague at the University of Colorado. It's just an interview study. So if you're interested in possibly being interviewed as part of a research study, just send me an email and we can chat about whether you're a good fit for this study. All right, so focusing on our first topic, so diversity among people with hearing loss. So when I talk with employers and organizations, I like to show them this audiogram that has different common sounds on it, as well as where different letters come in. And I assume most people have seen more audiograms than they care to admit, right? But of course, the bottom part, the frequency, is the pitch, how low or high frequency a sound is. So things like a bus are lower frequency, things like bird chirping are higher frequency. And then going from top to bottom is the power that is needed to hear those sounds, assuming you have, quote, normal hearing. So buses and airplanes are very loud, gunshots are really loud, birds and leaves rustling at the top of the diagram are um, are softer, not so loud. And then the X's and O's in the center are kind of a common what they call ski slope hearing loss, which is what I had until the slope went flat, right? But what a lot of people don't understand is that it's possible to hear some sounds really well and not hear other sounds at all. And I think this is part of why so many people are so slow to recognize their own hearing loss, right? Because it's not like the world goes quiet. Different little parts of the world go quiet. Suddenly the birds are all gone, right? Or other sounds are gone. So it's complicated. I heard an audiologist say the misconception with hearing loss is that you don't hear things. And maybe a better way to think of it is that we easily misunderstand things because you're only getting parts of the letters represented on this diagram. So we're getting bits and pieces. Most people naturally learn to speech read as they miss different parts of speech. Um, I joke sometimes that I've never met a barkeeper who didn't speech read at least a little bit because it's such a noisy environment. So anyways, I think this diagram is helpful for people that don't understand hearing loss to explain why you hear some things, you don't hear other things, why you hear well when it's quiet, why you struggle when there's a lot of background noise, for example. So some other dimensions beyond the audiogram is that it's really different if you lose your hearing when you're 3 than if you lose it at 83, right? Or in the context of the workplace, if you lose your hearing when you're in your 60s, it's more a matter of how you'll handle retirement or maybe the last few years of your working career. If you lose your hearing when you're 20 or 30, then you have your whole career ahead of you that you need to try to adopt for. And it's even different if your hearing loss occurs while you're still in school trying to get an education. And that can be both good and bad. So in my case, I was losing my hearing while I was getting my education. So it allowed me to adapt my studies for things that I might be able to do more successfully after graduation. In one of my interviews, I talked with someone who taught English as a second language and they were losing their hearing. And they talked about how they really couldn't help people learn to speak English anymore because they were missing too much of what the person was saying. So that's what I'm talking about when I say age at onset. At what age did you lose your hearing? Now, all of you know that's a bit of a loaded question because there's the initial onset, but there may be other changes that are really significant later on. So you might have, quote, multiple ages of onset in your hearing loss. Then severity. Severity is your overall level of hearing loss. So in this diagram, we can see, normal, mild, moderate, moderately severe, severe. But in the case of this person, I think it would really make sense to describe their hearing loss as everything from normal to severe, because it depends on the frequency that they're trying to hear. So severity is complicated, and it's important for other people to understand that. And then progression. So progression would be one-dimensional progression would be how quickly you lose your hearing. So some people like myself, it unfolds over decades. Other people, it unfolds overnight. They go to sleep with fairly normal hearing, they wake up, and that is really, really traumatic to have that sudden of a change. So progression makes a difference also. So all those things lead into how people identify and how they choose to communicate. So that's the next line here on number 2. Some people see themselves as capital D deaf, which we usually think of as people who are immersed in the deaf culture, use American Sign Language as their primary mode of communication. The other big group would be, quote, hard of hearing. I personally don't like that term too much, even though I've accepted it's the most common term, because hard makes it sound like hard-headedness. So I prefer people with hearing loss, which doesn't apply to everybody, but that's my personal preference. And then deaf with a small d is usually used to indicate the audiological construct or group as opposed to um, uh, a sociological group. And then there's intersectionality, right? So those aspects of my hearing loss matter, but it's not the only part of my identity that matters. And that's true for everybody here also. All right. So again, when I talk with employers, I try to explain how all those different attributes of someone with hearing loss lead to different work outcomes. So all these different attributes, including age, race, gender, onset age, severity, by frequency, course, um, and other disabilities possibly impact someone's identity at work. So some people with hearing loss identify as big D deaf, some people small d deaf, some people hard of hearing, some people with hearing loss, and some people with hearing loss identify as hearing. So they have hearing loss, but their identity is I am a hearing person. No, I don't have hearing loss. Really common. So identity impacts the social groups that someone participates in. It impacts communication needs. So I was telling a joke the other day when I first started at Rochester Institute of Technology, the president of RIT came up to me and he introduced himself very nervously using American Sign Language. And that was great. I appreciated the effort on his part, but it's not my preferred language, so to speak. So communication needs differ based on those identity groups and backgrounds. So common ones would be people that use sign language, people who use hearing as best they can, So cochlear implants, hearing aids, and auxiliary devices as well. And then you have people that really rely mostly on captioning or written language. And people blend, of course, all three of those. But that's what I mean by communication needs, which leads to accommodation needs. Okay. So key takeaways from that mini lecture, and then we'll open up for questions and discussion, would be that there are many different diversity dimensions for people with hearing loss. And as part of that, for us as people have hearing loss, it means we need to be patient self-advocates, even when we're frustrated. So I could have been all upset when the president of RIT, introduced himself using ASL, but I realized that it was hard for him. He made an effort. And so I just patiently explained, and I do know a little sign language, right? So I thanked him and then shared that I generally preferred spoken communication. So because of that diversity, you should expect other people to be confused and be overwhelmed and be afraid to ask. So that's why we have to be patient self-advocates. And that's why it needs to be an ongoing conversation. So even my wife forgets sometimes, right? So I have to remind her, no, wait for me to put my cochlear implants on. Um, so it's not something, unfortunately, that you can talk with your supervisor or coworkers about once. It needs to be something that you bring up whenever it becomes relevant. And then for all of us, focusing on our abilities, focusing on the things that we can do. And those are the main takeaways from this segment. So I'll pause now for questions and comments. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see the chat also. Yeah, Julie.
Hi, thank you for being with us tonight. I wear
Sure.
true hearing aids, have had them since 4 years old. I identify as hearing impaired, so it was interesting to hear you talk about the terminology. I've had discussions about hard of hearing versus hearing impaired or hearing loss with friends. Will you be talking about disclosure in the workplace? Because I'm finding that's something that can get a little sticky. In my line of work, I'm a special education teacher, and it's always a little bit of a pause for me whether to disclose to parents and families in the special education meetings. So because the minute you introduce that, my hair is usually down, so it's not the first thing you would think of. You're setting up an opportunity where someone can make an internal judgment call about your ability or intelligence, or your ability to teach their child, especially in the area of English language arts. So I don't know if that was something you had some insight on, or tips or tricks as we go along through the presentation. Just throwing that out there to the community. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we can talk about that a little bit now. You raised a couple really good points, and I'm not going to have um, clear answers for you. It depends, I think. And we'll circle back and maybe talk about this again when we talk about career success a little bit. With the first thing on terminology, the most accepted terms would be deaf, capital D, / hard of hearing to cover everybody. I personally don't like that. I introduce myself as a deafened cochlear implant user because it describes me most completely. Um, and with that, I can kind of look to see if the person wants more or if they're like, I don't want to know more, and adopt, what I say after that. And you raise a really good point. It's constantly a balance between we want people to see us as competent professionals, but we also need to disclose parts of our hearing loss so that we can communicate effectively. And that's changed a lot over time for me, right? So when I was a brand new person in the workplace, I had to err more on the side of making sure people viewed me as a competent professional. Now I feel like I need to do the opposite a bit more and make sure that I really disclose and share, I'm gonna sit in this meeting, but I'm not gonna get everything that people say, right? If you really want me to know, make sure you look at me or make sure you hold the microphone or whatever it is. Because at this point, I don't really need to worry too much about getting forced out or something. So I think for everybody, there's a different balance between making sure those around us view us as competent professionals versus disclosing what we need to disclose. And I also try to stress with people that disclosure to me doesn't mean telling HR, I'm deaf. Disclosure means I'm in a meeting with my coworkers and I say, hey, I didn't get that. And it's always a judgment call. So I just got elected to our faculty senate. So it's big, it's hard to follow. It's a lot of strong, professors from all over, strong accents. So I'm constantly assessing, did I understand that? And how important is it for me to have understood that in making judgment calls on that? So my personal preference would be to try to work towards an environment, and this is what I mean by job crafting and career crafting, where I can be pretty open about what I can hear and not hear. But I know that not everyone has that luxury. Does that help at all, Julie?
No, for sure. It gave me some other things to think about, and I'll continue to think of questions as you continue. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Thank you.
I definitely understand your dilemma, but don't want to pretend I know more than you do. All right, other questions? All right.
Anyone have any questions before David continues on?
I just a comment. Like Julie, you gave me a lot to think about as far as my identity, how I describe myself. And honestly, I've never really thought in that many dimensions about it. I've more avoided that by, just trying to identify in the hearing world for as long as I can, as much as I can. But obviously with aging, as you mentioned, and you get to retirement, different things open up that are not as impactful on your professional life, on your income stream, all those things that we're talking about. It would be great to believe that there would be a world where you could just be, just disclose and not really fear that you were going to be viewed differently. I've worked my whole career, 35 years in the financial service business. And I have to say to you, I rarely over that 35 years felt that I was in an environment that was accepting. Maybe it was me, but
I want to go back to one thing on language. So there are people that find the term hearing impaired offensive because it's like driving while being impaired. However, JAN, the Job Accommodation Network, a huge government agency, they're there to help you and help your employer find what accommodations. They still use the word hearing impaired. Other people don't like the term hearing loss because they were born with their deafness or their level of hearing. And so they view it as just how they are. There was no loss. However, for most people, statistically, it is something they lose over time and there's a real loss with it. But landmines on different terms. Carol? You're muted, by the way, Carol.
I keep forgetting this. You just have to touch the space bar. I never remember it. The idea of disclosing, it's really puzzling because what is disclosing? People know nothing about hearing loss. They still think it's like glasses. No matter how much you tell them it's different from glasses, it's not fully correcting it. So you disclose. You say, don't speak any louder. The hearing aids take care of the volume. Just speak more slowly. Or look at me. Or no matter what it is you say, let's say you're in a meeting and you explain to people that you're hard of hearing. Well, you can't give them the whole lecture on it. I live in a community and we do a lot of work together in running the place. It's sort of like a condo, but we're a lot closer than people in a condo. So we really know each other well. And for a while there, I was sending out a message once a year. I'd send out an email explaining about hearing loss. There are so many things to explain that I would almost do different things each year. But nobody can absorb all that. And, they don't realize in a meeting that they really have to be looking toward me, at least enough so that I can see their mouth. But, they're turning and looking over there. People who speak fast are just not able to speak slowly. You ask them to speak more slowly and they might do it for a sentence or two and then go back to their normal speech. Somebody has a foreign accent, you can just be lost and there's no way you're going to understand, but it's embarrassing to try and explain it to them. So how do you inform people so that it really does you any good?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. My personal approach is, and it's not, a cure-all, but trying to be really specific and in the moment. So, I was on the phone the other day with someone speaking really fast off a script, and I just told her, you can say everything twice, or you can just slow down and say it one time. It's your choice. But we do run into other people's limits too, right? So sometimes they don't know how to adjust or they can't adjust. But that's part of why I explain the complexity and diversity of hearing loss is that I do sympathize for other people because I know what works for me won't necessarily work for the next person with hearing loss if they meet. So I try to be really short, really brief, really specific on what I need in that moment. So sometimes it might be, I need to change chairs with you so the light is at my back and I can see your face. Or I might need to move our meeting to Zoom so that I have captioning or different specific accommodations. But that's what I mean about the ongoing conversations and the ongoing disclosure that it's not a one-time thing. So I'm going to move us on because some of these same things will come up as we progress a little bit. So I'm going to put my slides back up for a second. Make sure we cover everything at least a little bit. All right. So on from there we go. My screen froze up for a second. So I'm going to shift us on to talking about accommodations a little bit. And when I talk about accommodations in the general public, I often use Stephen Hawkins as an example because an example of someone who was brilliant, right? So brilliantly able, but also such severe disabilities that without accommodation, no organization would benefit from his brilliance at all, right? So I talk about accommodations as a way of tapping into people's abilities. So the abilities are there, but different people need different accommodations in order to tap into their abilities. So this is results of a research study, people with hearing loss, looking at the types of accommodations that they requested and how frequently. And you see equipment comes up sometimes on an annual basis, a little bit on a quarterly basis. Professional services like captioning, like American Sign Language interpreters is more common. But the most common types of accommodation are things we were just talking about. So they're assistance from others, both big and small, but often small things, right? A big one would be I'm currently negotiating with my supervisor to switch my teaching online because in an online course, I don't have hearing loss at all, right? I'm like anybody else. In a classroom, I can do it, but I often feel like I'm kind of standing on one foot, particularly as we were just talking about with students from all over the world, right? So it's their accents, it's about accommodating me, but it's also about accommodating them. So I'm accessible to them so that I don't unintentionally embarrass them, right, by asking my international students to repeat frequently. But those are the most common types of accommodation or assistance from others. A really simple one would be asking your boss to switch seats so that the light is at your back and you can see them more clearly, or moving to a quiet room, or talking one-on-one in addition to a larger meeting. So this is looking at reasons why people do not request accommodation. And if we look at due to effectiveness, we can see that most people decide not to ask for accommodation at least once on an annual basis. And really, it's kind of 50-50 on a weekly basis. Ease of use is another issue. Cost to the organization. Personal cost is more not monetary cost, but inconvenience to you, your supervisor. Normative appropriateness is whether it is viewed as okay or not okay in your organization to ask for accommodation specifically, or even ask for help. Some places it's not safe to ask for help. And in some ways, accommodation is a special form of that. So those are reasons that people don't request accommodation, and some data on the frequency that people withhold requests. And the main takeaway, I guess, is that most people decide not to ask for accommodation fairly frequently. And through my research, I know it's not an irrational choice. It's because they judge that they're better off not asking than if they do ask for accommodation. So some tips for people who are deaf/hard of hearing, using the most common abbreviation. Request needed accommodation, but make it really easy for others to comply. So I don't expect my supervisor to understand hearing loss as well as I do. He never will, right? So looking at the classroom I teach in, I've been pushing for Auracast because it's a new technology, but I provide all the information to him and IT on exactly what I want. It doesn't mean I'll get it. Legally, my employer is required to provide reasonable accommodation, not my preferred accommodation. So anyways, but I ask for exactly what I want, and I make it really easy to say yes to that. And I focus on the benefit to my employer. So in my case, I don't really talk about myself in the classroom. I talk about my desire to do the best possible job that I can for my students. And here's what I need to do the best possible job that I can in the classroom. Here's what I need to do my research. So an example there would be, I go back and forth in this, but at one point I asked my employer to buy me a Roger pen to use at conferences. Debatable about whether that's an employer accommodation or a personal accommodation, but I went for it. Why not, right? But the way I presented it is you guys spend $5,000 a year to fly me around the world to attend conferences and represent Oregon State. How about another $1,000 so that I can hear better when I go to where they have all the booths and so forth, when I meet with people one-on-one and so forth. So anyways, and they agreed with that logic. But the key point is, I think you're better off focusing on benefits to the employer and how you can do your job better, as opposed to just asserting what you're entitled to. And then with accommodation, so crafting your task, job, and career to tap into your abilities, this is why I have moved to teaching more online, because there is no communication barrier in online teaching. It's easy for me. I debate about it from the visibility standpoint, because part of me wants to be in the classroom and force students to adapt to me. The final selling point would be that online teaching is somewhat addictive, because I can do it from a ski area, I can do it from a foreign country, right? So it became kind of a lifestyle choice as well. But that's between us, right? So, anyways, you can craft your task, your job, and your career to so that the number and types of accommodations that you need is more selective. And then making the best use of available technologies. So the rate of change for technology is astounding right now. So for me personally, right now, streaming the meeting in from my computer using a Roger, which is a phone app product, to stream via Bluetooth into my cochlear implants or my iPad or my iPhone, I hear more and better now than I do since early childhood. And that's going to keep getting better, but it's also going to get increasingly complicated, right? So I think it's really important for all of us to stay on top of technology and use the best available technologies. So a common one now are the Bluetooth streaming. For some people, it might be remote American Sign Language. For all of us right now, I think we're using AI captioning. So these tools are just continuing to grow. So stay tapped into HLA to stay on top of them. And then again, the thought about being a patient educator of others. And as part of that, managing your own energy, stress, and attitude. So the classroom is exhausting for me, even if it's exhilarating. So I'm in a type of work where a lot of my work I can do with my cochlear implants out, and I'm in my hyper focus mode. So I don't, I have worked in administration at points. I was director of an MBA program for a while, and I could do it. I just found it exhausting being in meetings all day, every day. So that was career crafting to avoid administration, be more of a regular professor, so to speak. But at the same time, there's a tender balance between managing our energy and our stress and avoiding isolation. So for me, I often skip large social events because I know they're just going to be difficult for me, but I compensate for that by inviting people to lunch or coffee so that I can talk with them one-on-one or in small groups. So making sure that you manage your energy and your stress, but also avoid becoming overly isolated. So I think that takes us to our next pause and chat. So I'll stop sharing for a second so we can see each other. All right, so the topic is accommodation. Julie?
I'm back. Thank you for your summation of what you just talked about in terms of accommodations. I'm actually pursuing a Roger Mike right now in my place of employment, setting up a meeting with HR to have a 504 plan drafted. Do you have any suggestions? Actually, before I say that, I really appreciate how you framed when you presented the need for accommodation to your employer, that you put it as what would be beneficial to them. Because that was something that I was struggling in my own head of how to kind of manage HR when I meet with them. Would you recommend bringing someone with you, or do you go on your own first with HR? I'm kind of in that middle place of, do I bring a union rep? I don't want to escalate it too quickly, but I also have mixed feelings about our HR department.
Yeah, so I mean, my basic approach is very cordial and friendly, but I'm always prepared to escalate. In my case, I'm a professor who does research on accommodation, so everybody knows that I know the law. Um, so I keep everything friendly. I also keep track of the conversations. So I would not have anyone with me, at least initially. However, if it became necessary, then yeah, you might need to go that route. But the analogy that I give a little bit, and it's a little bit extreme, but suppose you're having marital trouble, right? And you need to have a conversation with your spouse, but you bring your attorney along. Well, that's a very different conversation. And once you open that door, there's no going back, right? That door is open. So in a research study, I share that when you ask for accommodation, you're possibly revealing three things. One would be you need help. You do need help, right? Second would be that you may be someone who is asserting your rights. And the third would be that you see yourself as someone who has a disability. And the ADA is interpreted such that if you describe yourself as someone with a disability, then your employer needs to see you that way. So long answer to short question, but I would say no, start out, keep it really cordial. Again, focus on what's best for your organization and your customers, the parents and students, and then take it from there if you need to. And sadly, there are places where you need to play hardball, but your odds of successfully winning an ADA discrimination suit are not good. Yeah, so you have the law on your side, but it's really hard to bring it to bear because it takes like a court case, and you don't want to go there if you can avoid it. So, Jonathan.
Yes, hi. This is something that you and I have talked about last summer at the HLAA convention, and this is where we brought it up, and I knew that it was going to be a very important topic to me, and I know that goes for everyone else. There's a couple of people in this chat room that I have gone to your workplace. I've seen the combination that they requested if they do receive it, but because it's reasonable combination, like such as getting a $20 something from Amazon and so forth, so no problem about that. But one of the things that, like you were just saying about ADA law being on our side, but sometimes things don't work out the way that we wanted to. But it's just that, like, for me, I feel like not a lot of companies, big corporations, don't have a understanding what ADA actually stands for, or what it means to do in order to accommodate you. So one of the things that I've learned from my experience was that if you were to reach out to somebody for a combination, and they would just respond to you back with whatever reason. But what I think that now is that what most companies should start doing is to bring someone to the workplace so they can educate that person that's having a difficult time hearing, say, okay, this person's having a difficult time hearing. He's gonna need this, he's gonna need that, or why not bring that person to the position that's gonna be useful for that person? So do you see any changes about that?
Well, I mean, my experience with large corporations is that they know the ADA, um, but often they view it more from like a lawsuit or risk mitigation perspective, right? Um, from a training standpoint, they have they need to work with all the different dimensions of diversity. So often employers want trainings on diversity where hearing loss might be a small part of it. I have done a few trainings for companies focusing on hearing loss specifically, but usually companies are looking for like a general diversity training that will cover everything, right? And it's just a matter of time and money and so forth. So I think a simple tool for working with your employer would be to work with JAN, Job Accommodation Network, because Jan is there to make it easier for the employer. And the employer can talk with Jan confidentially and not be worried about, saying the wrong thing or triggering a lawsuit. Does that make sense?
So you have a website called Sheen, and any company can contact them and say, hey, I'm having a problem with that, with the employee.
Yeah.
What should I do?
Yeah. That's what Jan exists for. And you go to the website, and I don't like that they still use the term hearing impaired because it shows that maybe they're not totally on top of things, but I like that they have a separate page for if you have an employee who is culturally deaf, big D deaf, here are accommodations you should look at. If you have an employee who has hearing loss, or I think they use the term hearing impaired, here are the things that you should look at. But their job is to help employers find reasonable accommodations for their employee, regardless of the disability type.
Okay. Well, oh, I just sent it something on the chat room, but it seemed to be the Brad beat me to it. But yeah, if anybody wants to know more information about it, click on the link in the chat room. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great resource. Any other questions about accommodations before we move on? Been great questions so far. Make sure we get to our last topic. So the last topic is about career success, and then we can talk about any of these things a little bit more. So I will share my screen again, a few more slides.
Great.
All right. Okay, so career success, again, how we tap into our abilities. So I'll start out. So the research on career success, some common issues that came up are things that people really struggle with, or barriers to their success. Communication, major barrier, of course, but within that, phone calls are really difficult for people with hearing loss, meetings, and then one-on-one communication with supervisors, coworkers, and customers. So interestingly, it depends on the person. So some people with hearing loss find in-person meetings the easiest. Other people like myself, I actually find Zoom or Teams easier because everyone is on my screen. Everyone is the same distance from the microphone. I can stream in via Bluetooth. I have captioning. So I'm constantly telling my coworkers that hate Zoom that Zoom is my happy place. I love Zoom. Hybrid meetings that mix in-person and online tend to be the worst for people with hearing loss because you have challenges of each modality happening simultaneously. Impression management we talked about before. So how we get other people to see us as capable professionals, but people that have this difference of hearing loss and need to do our work a little bit differently in balancing those two things. Isolation is a huge problem for people with hearing loss. And stress and fatigue are often things we don't think about enough, but it's really common for people to come home from work and be exhausted, take their hearing aids out, right? I can't wait to not communicate for a while. So an interesting study I came across from the Netherlands, it talked about how in looking at hearing loss, people were aware of their increased stress and fatigue before they understood that their hearing had changed. So they knew they were stressed out, but they didn't know why. And it made me think about the importance of stress and fatigue. Now, most of us who have been coping with hearing loss for a long time, it just kind of fades in the background, right? It's just part of life, like a stressful commute or something. But it's important not to lose sight of how stress and fatigue impacts us. Okay, so this study looked at career success after hearing loss or a significant change in someone's hearing. But as kind of a backdrop, it's important to understand that when we talk about career success in the general population, we're usually talking about pay, how much people earn. We're talking about how high up they are in an organization or their status. And then we talk about satisfaction. And there are three independent dimensions. So you can be highly paid and hate your job. Examples of that. You can be really satisfied with your work, but have trouble making ends meet. And same for being high or low in an organization. But that's usually when people research career success, they're trying to understand what factors impact those three things in different ways. So in doing in-depth interviews with people with hearing loss who had found success post-hearing loss, we found that those people were interested in pay, they were interested in promotions, status, satisfaction. Those things still mattered, but increasingly they defined success as remaining employed. So finding or keeping a job was something they didn't take for granted anymore, but they found that to be an element of success. They also felt successful if they had a good job fit between their talents and also their hearing loss. People focused more on having bosses and coworkers who got it or understood and finding places where they were included. So as people acquired hearing loss, their definition of career success expanded a little bit. Okay, so how did people go about finding success post-hearing loss? So step one is accepting your hearing loss. Simple, right? I would say on average, that took a decade for people to accept their hearing loss. And that change in identity, no, I'm not a quote normal hearing person anymore. I'm a person with hearing loss. And that's the second step. So you have to accept or acknowledge the change in your biology before you can change your identity. Once you accept your new identity, then you're more able to manage your hearing loss. So using assistive technologies. So for example, if you're not open about your hearing loss, then using a microphone is out of the question, right? And you might try to cover your implants, asking for accommodations out of the question because your energy is on preserving an outdated identity or a false sense of self. So number 3 and 4 kind of go together, but as people start to manage their hearing loss, they join groups like HLAA. And I want to pause here for a second to highlight how important you being a part of this group is in helping other people accept their hearing loss and expand their network. The first group that I participated in was actually ALDA in Boston. I was in my 20s. I was becoming completely deaf. I walked into a room, the average age was probably 70 or something. And it's like, oh my God, I don't belong. But over time, I found my niche, both in terms of organization. At times it's been ALDA. Now it's more HLAA with my cochlear implants. And within those networks, I've met other really amazing, successful professionals. So John Waldo, who some of you may know, became a close friend and mentor. I was just in Seattle with Chad Ruffin, who is a deaf surgeon. So I found my people, so to speak, and found people that I could learn from, and also opportunities to help other people, which I know all of you find really satisfying too. But that is a new network. So I still have my professional networks, but I also have my, deaf and hard of hearing networks that keep me informed and keep me emotionally healthy. Then there's that notion of redefining career success. So I know for me, one upside of hearing loss is I don't engage in as much social comparison. So you'd be amazed how many really successful, financially, status, whatever people there are who are super miserable because they're always engaging in social comparison. There's always someone with more, right? So for me, I've been able to redefine career success in terms of autonomy. I feel really successful and lucky that I can devote a lot of my time and attention to researching other people with hearing loss. So that's part of my sense of success. And then the last part I've already mentioned quite a bit, but would be job and career crafting. So for me, that involved going back to school, getting my PhD. I mean, that was just kind of that's what worked out for me personally. And then in focusing my research on people with hearing loss, suddenly my hearing loss is not only not a negative, it's a positive. Because in interviewing other people with hearing loss, I pick up on things that people who have never experienced hearing loss would never pick up on, right? So there's a sense of trust and understanding that other people don't have. So that would be part of the job crafting. I mentioned before, I've also moved most of my teaching online. That would be another example of job and career crafting. John Waldo, another example. So he was a successful but kind of unhappy corporate attorney with hearing loss. It was a brutal transition, right? Realizing that he couldn't do the things that he used to do, freaking out, I can't operate in a courtroom anymore. What am I going to do? So John refocused his practice to focus on serving people with hearing loss and was much happier, maybe a little less successful financially, but he carved out a great career for himself and turned his quote disability on its head. So his disability became his strongest asset. All right. Okay. So takeaways. Having said all that, some things I encourage you to think about are the small and big changes you can make to craft your job so that your hearing loss has less of a negative impact and maybe can become something positive for you that allows you to do a better job than your colleagues who have, quote, normal hearing. For some people, that requires returning to school. For some people, that's an option. For others, it's not. Some people move from the private sector to the public sector. It's one thing I thought about becoming a professor. So universities tend to provide a lot of accommodation that other places might not. It's just a more friendly place, so to speak. Often not-for-profits are better at accommodating people than for-profit businesses, and that's a long story. Some people start their own businesses. There's often an increased focus on technical subjects where you can express your competence through things other than spoken communication. So, for example, being A telemarketer might be a very brutal job for someone with hearing loss, but being a behind the scene technical expert is something that helps people more. So a lot of accountants, a lot of engineers, things that have a strong technical focus that don't require a lot of ongoing communication. Increase autonomy so that you can engage in more career and job crafting. And then again, the holy grail would be finding ways to take your quote disability and turn it into your greatest asset. These are more ongoing everyday strategies. So that is keeping yourself educated so you can educate other people. These are ongoing everyday conversations. If you find yourself frustrated, that might not be the best time to bring it up at work. Wait till you calm down and they can have a more friendly conversation. I try to balance my help seeking with making sure I'm always eager to help other people so that when I need something, people are more apt to say yes because I've helped them also. And then managing, your energy, your stress, your attitude, and using humor, helping other people feel good about themselves is part of being integrated in the workplace. And that takes us back to questions. Yeah, Catherine, you're muted. You're muted, Catherine? Catherine, you're still muted?
Catherine Allen, you're still muted.
Always a
There you go.
mute. Thank you. So first of all, just a tad of background. So I work for a large public corporation and I lost my hearing mid-30s. So I had perfect hearing one day and actually no hearing the next day. I got some of it back. And then later on, about 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, I had another incident that basically took almost the rest of my hearing. So I have hearing aid and a cochlear implant, which is pretty crazy, but I make it work. But I would just share that I had a real difficult time to start with in terms of sharing my hearing loss, and I don't refer to it as a disability. My line is, I have hearing loss. It is what it is. And so I try to do everything I can to work through it. And I have a very big job, about 250,000 customers in my client base. So I got to keep doing a lot of what I do. And I had a hard time asking for accommodation, but the more I asked and the more I started to make headway, it helped. And I also phrase that not only does some of the accommodation like closed captioning help me, it actually helps a lot of other people in the company. They just don't want to admit it until like, oh, great, captioning. Unfortunately, I work in a glass building, literally. So every conference room is glass and it is the worst possible thing we could do. And I would share in terms of education that I literally had the group that I work in. I had to lead a meeting one time. So I said, fine, we're going to do it my way. And that was that I went out and bought really heavy duty earplugs and I made everybody put them on and do the entire meeting with the earplugs and try to hear all of the things that I was sharing without seeing it on screen. So it's a really good way in a relatively small setting to help educate people and understand at least a little bit. And I've literally say these days I'm much more of a guerrilla advocate. I try to be polite, but it's just captioning. I can't survive without captioning. So I've made inroads in the company. There's still a lot of things to go by and to be improved. And unfortunately, I've had people literally say, if you can't hear, you shouldn't have the job that you have. And I've had people where I've asked them to repeat themselves because I didn't hear all of what they said. And they said, I'm not going to do that. If you can't hear me, it's your problem. I ignore that. Okay. I gotta keep moving. So the question that I have is that I am really dependent in conferences, in big meetings with, if somebody is captioning, it's fabulous. And I've actually talked a trade association into providing captioning at their annual conference, which I just went to a couple weeks ago. And everybody I work with was amazed that, oh my God, people caption these things, and 1,000 other people benefited from that. So that's a really nice plus. The problem is when I come out of that huge ballroom and go onto a trade floor, I can't hear because of the noise, the acoustics, all of that. So I'm trying to find an innocuous app that I can put on my phone so that if I can just carry it, keep it in front of me, so it'll help me hear. So that's what my question is. Where
Yeah.
do I go to
Yeah.
find those and
Oh.
use them? And I don't care what it looks like or anything. I want to be able to participate. I want to be able to comprehend what everybody's saying.
Yeah, so I'll share two tools and then other people may have others. So first off, it sounds like you've done an awesome job, adapting in your workplace. So kudos to you for that. This is the Roger microphone I was talking about. And so I'm using it right now to stream Bluetooth 2 ways from my cochlear implants to you all and from you all to me. But it is also just a regular microphone and it has 3 modalities. So if I point at someone, it works as like a cone and picks up, whatever is in that cone. If I lay it flat on a table, it picks up everyone around the table. And then in a separate app, I can turn off like this microphone and just have these two on. And then third, and like if it's just one person I want to hear, they can wear it and it just picks up the person. So I found it really helpful at big conventions like you're talking about. The second thing would be there are a bunch of different captioning apps, AI apps for your phone. I think I use Ava the most right now, but there are several different ones. And so that is helpful in situations where the microphone is not helpful using both of them. But you can hold the phone up and it'll caption the person that you're trying to hear. Or I was at a conference in Scotland and I didn't request accommodation in advance. And I typically had at conventions, if I asked for accommodate or asked for captioning, they have someone, caption wherever I want them to caption. So they'll go to a small session with me. They don't do great for like a cocktail party or the different booths you go to. That's where the microphone, right, and the app are useful. But anyways, I'm in Scotland and everyone's speaking English, but oh my God, the Scottish accent, I was totally unprepared for it. I was blown away, right? So I fished out my Ava app and it actually picked up pretty well with the accent. Then on the way home from that conference, I went to a different conference in Boston. We were at the Boston Convention Center. And the app, for whatever reason, had trouble with that building and it didn't pick up nearly as well in that setting. But those are the two tools that I know of. Neither is perfect, but I think you'll find them helpful. The Roger may not be the right solution depending on what type of cochlear implant and hearing aid you have, but there'll be some type of remote microphone that will help you.
That helps. What do you use if you're I have business meetings for lunch in restaurants, and that's a deal breaker. So is there something that you can use in a restaurant setting with all that background noise? Use the Roger. Okay. No.
This is awesome. Yeah. So particularly one-on-one, my wife is fairly high frequency voice, not super loud spoken. So I set it up with her and I can turn that microphone on 100%, turn everything else way down. And it's one of those times when I really, the difference, I start to appreciate how hard I normally work because like my stress goes down. I'm no longer an irritable conversation partner, but someone who, wants to hear what's being said. And then in a meeting setting, same thing, I was at dinner the night with two people and I had on the table, turned off all the mics except for the two by them. And again, it was so much easier to converse with them, so much less stressful, not perfect. When I left to use the restroom, I could still hear them because my mic's still on the table. So anyways, yeah, so not perfect tools, but so much better than they were 3 years ago. So you really have to keep trying new technologies.
Okay, and that's the Roger pen that you're talking about, that you're
Yeah.
using there on the table? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it is for phone app products. But I know like cochlear or other people have their own products.
All
What
right,
I,
thank you.
Yep. What I did for you, Catherine, is well, I have two questions. I have two things to tell you. One, what is the brand of your hearing aid?
Oh, the brand? Uh, um, it's new, it doesn't work that well, and I have a cochlear brand, cochlear implant, and it's the hearing aid that they recommend that in theory is the most compatible, and I will say I don't agree with that. But I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry. I can get back to you if you'd like and share that. But at the moment, I don't even remember.
Yeah, and I think they call their microphone the mini mic.
Yeah, no, I do. I've tried the mini mic, but it in a restaurant, it's an absolute waste. And sometimes even in a one-on-one, especially in glass conference rooms, it doesn't help. So I use the phone app for the cochlear implant, which controls both the implant and the hearing aid. But it doesn't work. And that dramatically adversely impacts my work if I have to be in a meeting in a restaurant or a glass room, which is every day.
Yeah, what I did was I put in the chat room the Roger pen of what David's been talking about. So feel free to click on the link. And I see another one in the chat room where Brad shared is called Ava, which is one of the closed caption app. So there's so many tools out there that you can use. You just need to educate yourself and to see and see what's best suit for you. I already sent you our email address so we can have your emails or we can respond it to you to give you a list of technologies, pen, closed captions app, etc.
So just one thing, Jonathan. So Catherine, one of our chapter leaders, Carol Agat, she was on earlier, but she's very experienced in using the Roger devices. So I will connect you two via email. And she has both the pen and the Roger on, and she could be helpful to talk to as you work through that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's a big help. Everybody, thank you very much. Yeah, because I love what I do, but I want to do it better. And there's a lot of pressure that people don't necessarily support my work, even though I really deliver benefits for the company. So anyway, thank you.
We totally understand what you're coming from, and that goes for all of us. That we need something in order to function in the workplace.
Yeah.
So before I go on and show one of my PowerPoint slides, David, do you have anything to share before I go on?
No, I put my email address in the chat also. So if you're interested in that study I talked about, it'd be a privilege to interview some of you, or if you want to ask follow-up questions, that's how you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. It looks like we have just about 5 more minutes left, so perfect timing. So before we close out this meeting, I'm going to show you something. So we have a lot of interesting meetings coming up. For one, this is a national HLAA National, which is kind of what we talked about tonight, which is to empower your workspace how to ask for a combination. So this is a really good meeting to go to educate yourself, see how you could ask HR, ADA. We're going to go to requesting a combination. And then we're going to go on to the next slide. If my computer lets me, there we go. And the first two, I'm going to leave that to Brad, since Brad works at the Wilmington Memorial Library. So Brad, if you could unmute yourself and share about this event.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. So as Jonathan mentioned, my name is Brad McKenna. I work for the Wilmington Memorial Library. I'm also the technology director for HLAA Boston. So I have a lot of different hats, but I'm not wearing one right now. Anyway, so March 3rd is the World Health Organization's World Hearing Day. And so what I did is we have two different programs on the 3rd. So these are both in-person events. So if you're in and around the Wilmington area, please think about joining. The first one is a special story time. So I'm working with my youth librarian, and she's going to read a kid's book called Can Bears Ski? And it's a really cute kid's book about a little bear getting his first set of hearing aids. And so after that, I will show my hearing aids to the kids so they can kind of ask some questions and see it. They will not be the set I am wearing. They will be my backup set because kids. And the other one is a life in music, lost and found. And so Betty Hawk, I can never pronounce her last name, but she was a constant violist who lost her hearing. And so she goes around talking about what that was like for her. So you can't, she was in I can't remember what orchestra she was in, but she played music for a living, and then she couldn't hear the music. And so it's a really good story. I've seen her before. Actually, we held the talk back in November for this chapter, and it was heartwarming because it changed her life. She couldn't do her job anymore. I mean, unfortunately, there's no accommodations you can give someone who needs to hear the music to know when to come in on the song. And so she shares her story, how she came to terms with that, and she brings her instruments and does some pieces to show how she still has some. So she did lose her music, but hence the title. She found it. So it's a good story. It's tough, obviously, but it's good to hear. And so that's at night. So in the morning we have the story time for kids, and then at night we have an all ages program with Betty. So if you're around Wilmington, please join us. I'll post the link to register in the chat.
Is there, Brad, is there going to be any food and beverages over there?
There are not. So sorry, if you're hungry, eat before.
Alrighty, thank you very much for sharing that information. You can find all that in our website in the HLAA/boston.org for all that information, as well as the Wilmington Memorial Library website under the menu events. Then I'm gonna, for the other two events, on March 19, we have another Zoom meeting with the amazing professor from Northeastern named Nicole Levin, who teaches audiologists, and it's going to be about audio rehab and hearing device grant. And it's going to be on March 19 from 6 p.m. to 7:15 p.m. Is already in our social media and in our website, so you can click on the link and register. And as well as on March 28th to the 30th, the end of March, we have our first official annual Hearing Loss New England Conference in Marlborough, Massachusetts. Is going to be held in Hilton Garden Inn. We actually had just needed to extend more rooms because it almost just sold out. So, Baldridge Barbara Kelly, the HLAA, is going to be there. She's going to do some public speaking. We have a lot of fantastic public speakers that are going to be there. It's going to be an amazing time to socialize and get to know one another. Again, all that is on the website and our social media. And on the bottom, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. And I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to David for being reasonable and able to share everything of what we need to learn tonight. And I'm pretty sure that we're all going to see you this summer at the HLAA convention in Indianapolis. And I will definitely would love to attend to that Deaf and Hard of Hearing Awareness baseball game that's going to be over there. And is there anything you would like to add, David?
No, just to thank you all for being here and thank you for all the important work that you do, helping other people, right? Being there for each other. And keep in mind, I mean, work is a struggle, right? So I've heard your difficult stories, but I recognize all the hard work and effort that's gone into all of you maintaining your careers. So give yourself a pat on the back for your successes as well and celebrate each other. All right. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Have a
you.
good night, everyone.